Hello, everybody. Welcome to a Thursday night edition. How's that of Narrative Live? It's good to be with you tonight with Eric Garland, our intelligence analyst and regular co-host. How are you, Eric?
I'm well.
Are you excited? Because we have something really special tonight.
We have a bunch of really special things.
Yes, but we also have actual presidential candidates on the show.
I know.
So we've had, this is pretty reaching above our weight, or whatever the expression might be.
Just to put everyone at ease, it's not me. I'm not running for anything.
We might need you to run by the time we get to the situation might be so critical. But before that time, I'm going to introduce our first ever presidential candidate on Narrative Live. How are you, John Castro? How are you doing?
Good. Glad to be here. Thank you.
You're not only just a presidential candidate for the Republican Party, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
You're also the guy suing Donald Trump for violating the 14th Amendment?
Yes. So you want to give you a little bit of background?
Yeah, I'd love to hear about that, yeah. And then we'll talk about your campaign as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was one of the first ones. I have 2 law degrees, one of which is from Georgetown University Law Center in Washington, D.C., also an alum of Harvard Business School. And I was originally a part of the Never Trump camp in the Republican Party, all the way going back to 2016. 2018 was the time when I finally decided to do something when Trump was backing Roy Moore in Alabama. And so us and a number of Republicans, notably, with the Lincoln Project, got very heavily involved in the Alabama campaign and, actually turned the state blue.
Amazingly.
So that's when we really realized, how much power we had when we came together. And it wasn't necessarily that we wanted to turn the state blue, but we couldn't allow another Trump sycophant and somebody with a very, very shady background to be elected to the United States Senate. And so that kind of sparked my initial, re-entry back into politics. I used to be in politics when I was a lot younger, but I had kind of stayed out of the fray for a long time, mainly because I was busy building my law firm, building my personal wealth, and things were going really good. And kind of the last thing you want to do as a business person when you spent, so much time and effort and years building a successful business is becoming political and then risking, possibly throwing that all away, losing clients as a result and things like that. So after the January 6th insurrection, I was pretty furious. I'll be honest, I always knew that was going to happen. I absolutely knew it was going to happen. Everybody kept on saying no, you're exaggerating. He would never do something like that. I
mean, you had a feeling in your gut that it was going to happen, not that you actually knew.
Oh, correct. Yes. Yeah, let me clarify
These
that.
days it matters in the GOP.
Yeah. I had a very strong feeling of this is not going to end well. And I was proven right. And unfortunately, the way that the federal court rules work is, and people that challenged various presidential candidates' eligibility in the past, most notably the birthers that went after Obama, realized time and time again as their cases were dismissed that they didn't have standing to challenge his eligibility. That became the biggest issue. The courts kept on dismissing it by saying you don't have standing. And that's something that I'm pretty surprised that a lot of attorneys grapple with. They don't understand that concept. And so it's something that with my background in constitutional law, I understood what that meant. And what they were getting at was there was a court case from the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit called Fulani. And that case articulated that it has to be a fellow primary presidential candidate that brings the challenge. It can't even be a general candidate. So it can't be, the Democratic nominee, because once the parties have selected their nominee, the courts will say that it's now what's called a political question. Right. A political question basically means that it's too politically sensitive for us to get involved now. The party's already nominated this person. And so they will allow it to go to the election. So basically the challenge has to happen early. And so that's why we're gearing up. And pretty much the first primary is going to be in New Hampshire. And the filing to become a candidate opens in early November of 2023. So, pretty much about,
So you're becoming a candidate just because you want to challenge this ruling, or you're becoming a candidate because you want to be president?
A little bit of the former, more so of the former.
I was liking your policies. I got to say, I enjoyed some of.
Yeah. I mean, I ran a very serious campaign for Congress. Here in North Texas. It was a very policy focused. I have my policy positions. They're very well articulated. I think as my company has grown, which I think I mentioned this via email, like we recently just got a valuation of 180 million. So it's getting more and more tempting for me to stay out of politics just because financially things are going really well. But I want to use the revenue that's generated from my company, that's from this growing success of our tax or software company to finance this. And so I think this campaign is really to get my name out there. And also primarily, I just cannot personally stand Trump. As long as I'm alive, I'm going to make sure I do everything in my power.
I'll support you on that. That's for sure. Tell just briefly, what is the 14th Amendment for people who are not...
14th Amendment was post Civil War. Section 1, of course, frees the slaves and creates equal opportunity. And then when it gets to Section 3, that's the part that this is all coming down to. And it basically says that going forward into the future, anybody that took part in any sort of rebellion or insurrection against the United States of America is ineligible to hold office, which makes perfect sense, right? You attack our republic, then you can't represent our republic, right? Because you wanted to destroy it. So, logically, you shouldn't be allowed to represent something that you want to destroy. Yeah. And so they thought, hey, that makes perfect sense, right? We don't want to destroy ourselves from within. And so that's exactly, though, what happened on January 6th.
And after January 6th.
And it's continuing to this day. They're still laying the foundation. American coup 2.0. They're going to give it a second shot. I know that, and everybody that's paying close attention can see that they're still laying the groundwork for that. That's why they're obsessing over all the Secretary of State positions. So, because secretaries of state actually hold a lot of power when it comes to determining eligibility.
It's a good thing that you're here because you have all this experience in constitutional law. You have knowledge about the Insurrection Act. You have the 14th Amendment. We're going to talk all about that throughout this entire hour because we're going to break down some new stuff that we've been learning as we look through everything that we found out from, Eric and I have been doing the single command and control, which is really about, was President Trump and his inner circle in charge of that day? Like, were they actually calling the shots on January the 6th? And this is part of our investigation, which looks at the Pentagon and looks at Chris Miller and looks at what happens during those 187 minutes that the National Guard was not called in before they were deployed, at least, to Capitol Hill on January the 6th last year. Eric, anything you want to say before we get going?
Yeah, I got some questions. They can run long here, but I want to get into the weeds on some of the legal stuff. How far have the cases invoking this Insurrection Act against a candidate? What's the precedent case law like? What circuit is it in? And I'm assuming it's never reached the Supreme Court level. So your lawsuit here could, if it's really novel, this could go a long way towards establishing that. So how far is the precedent case law along in defining this?
Yeah, so the case law is unfortunately not as robust as we'd want because it's such a unique issue. The last time we dealt with any sort of major insurrection or rebellion against the United States government was the Civil War. My case really breaks it down. It's a lot to get. It is I want to say close to 20 pages, the lawsuit. So it dissects all of the history of it. There is a former Supreme Court justice that spoke on the issue when he presided on the case over Jefferson Davis. But the thing is that he was also campaigning to run for president or considering and testing the waters to run for president at the same time. So a lot of his decisions were very politically influenced. And so it's not very reliable. And historians have acknowledged that. Sure. And so, unfortunately, it's not where we'd want it to be, like a case very clearly saying, hey, this is the standard for giving aid or comfort. But even as far as the word insurrection, but we do know that insurrection and sedition are synonymous with one another. And, DOJ brought the first seditious conspiracy charge against the head of the Oath Keepers. So, that is effectively DOJ saying that there was an insurrectionary conspiracy. And right now it's all about trying to, of course, tie that to individual one, being Donald Trump.
Sure.
So interesting.
Well, I just want to push back a glass half full here. I think that we don't have really robust case law on insurrection since the Civil War is good, because if we had that much case law, we'd be Somalia.
Yeah.
So good point. And it sounds like your lawsuit is an opportunity. One assumes the Trump people would oppose it. And then, if you won, there'd be an appeal. And if it was a federal case, this goes up and becomes federal appellate law. And, there's some things that until these guys showed up, we didn't know we really could use some more rules on and some more precedent case law on to go, nope, that's illegal. You can't do that. And if you try and murder Congress or something, you can't run the next election. So kudos.
Hey, what about people like Hawley or Ted Cruz who might have been, rooting along for the insurrection, but, weren't the actual beneficiaries of an insurrection? Could they get tied up in this if they're running for the presidency?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, this goes into the definition of aid or comfort, is how liberal is the Supreme Court going to be with regard to that? It is a very important right, to be able to run for president. But they're going to have to weigh that against, again, what constitutes aid or comfort. The thing is that on the aid or comfort clause, that does have a little bit of precedent in case law, and the courts have been very liberal with that. So even as going as far as giving words of affirmation would be considered aid or comfort. The federal courts have held to that. And so Trump coming on TV saying, you're very special, right after the insurrection, when he saw on live television what was happening and still, sort of giving them that you're a special person and I love you. That is clear standard. The way that members of Congress reacted, even now, with Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, these are political prisoners, things like that. These are all, words of encouragement, words effectively ratifying their conduct and behavior. And so it's going to be very difficult for them to overcome that. But I would say over the next 4 to 10 years, we're going to see this develop in the courts. Because right now, the reason Republicans are obsessed with reclaiming the House is so they can shut down the January 6th committee, right? Because they think that if they shut it down now, that's it. There's no statute of limitations on this. Right. So as soon as Democrats retake the House again and retake the Senate, anytime they can basically bring these commissions back, bring these investigations back, and further use their subpoena power to dig more. So
they can also not ratify the next elections, right? I mean, they could do the same thing they tried to do last year and just not ratify the count. Whatever it was.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's get going because we're going to, this is a great conversation. We're going to keep having little bits of this as we continue throughout the day. But there is so much good stuff here that let's get into it, and then you'll be able to comment about some of the stuff we've been finding out as well. Up until now, just to catch you up a little bit here, we have reviewed in the last few weeks 3 different things. Well, we started off with Ginny Thomas's text, which we looked at, what is the role that she played in terms of supporting or encouraging the insurrection. These were texts she did to Mark Meadows. We also looked at the missing coal logs of Donald Trump. There's 7.5 hours of missing data from the presidential call logs that no one really knows what happened to the data. No one really knows if he made calls from other places in the White House. We believe he might have been maybe in the bunker of the White House. And then we also looked at Mike Lee's text, which were also to Mark Meadows, also seemed to be encouraging the insurrection, but also identifying him as one of the people involved in looking for these artificial or fake state electors from each state. And that seems to be a critical thing. That there was sort of 2 tracks. There was a legal track, or what they thought would be a legal track, and an illegal track. Then maybe both would be illegal, but there was a track where they could, if they had these official state electors, these false ones, they could present them as actual challenges to the actual slate of electors. And therefore, the vice president could have chosen to suspend that vote on that day. And that would have been what they were trying to achieve, then go into martial law and what have you. The other track was to just have the vice president do it without these slate of electors, because he had power anyhow, according to Donald Trump, at least. Do either of those actually true? Are both tracks legal tracks?
So I wouldn't say legal. They're theoretical.
Yes.
And, is it a possible construction and interpretation of the statute? Mm-hmm. Being objective and being an attorney, the answer to that is yes. It is a possible reading and construction of the statute. Is it plausible, though? The answer is no. And there's a difference between possible and plausible. Possible means there's some reasonable chance, maybe 5 to 10%, but when the overwhelming legislative history and prevailing legal authorities suggest otherwise, that's where, when it's something as sensitive as a national election, any reasonably prudent attorney would not support taking a legal position like that for a matter of national sensitivity and importance such as this.
This is both about getting an alternative slate of electors, but also the vice president having some sort of role. Both of those things are Illegal, but not plausible.
Correct. Yeah, legally possible, but definitely not plausible. And given the weight of importance, I do support the recommendation from a lot of state bars and the American Bar Association that these attorneys be disbarred and reprimanded for having advocated such a just a reckless legal position, again, for something of national importance. And the reason that I walk a thin line on this is because law firms like mine, and we're actually designing a tax software where we take unique and novel legal positions, interpretations of the law, right? So I'm used to reading the law and interpreting it in new ways that nobody has ever tried before. And so I always commend attorneys for having the courage to do that. But see, that you're talking about small issues, maybe $50,000 to $150,000 dispute between a taxpayer and the Internal Revenue Service, right? Not huge national importance like an election that's already, gone 5 million votes in favor of the other person. And you're clearly trying to overturn the will of the people. And that is, to me, where you can't engage in that type of behavior. For me, that's reckless.
That's a really nuanced view, and I've read the many of the pleadings from the Central District of California, which handled, because that's the location where Chapman University was, where John Eastman was teaching, so they got jurisdiction. And there were some pretty good arguments between the Eastman and the January 6th committee and the court. And when you say, yes, this is possible, we're not going to say it's impossible, but come on, get the hell out of here. The judge actually is funny. The judge actually, found in favor on a bunch of points for privilege. They were pretty generous to Eastman until it got to the crime fraud exception. And they're like, but now you guys are crushed. So now, it's like, could this have been for an upcoming litigation? Sure. I mean, Trump's got a lot of attorneys, but maybe this is another one. I'm not going to say it's not, which might be a precedent you don't want to establish in that circuit. That makes sense. Was there work product? Well, I guess this was, if there could have been a lawsuit, then this could have been work product, and give them that, and then gave them, there's other law professors who do cases, and you Chapman University emails. I'll give you that. Also, you were overthrowing the government, so fuck you.
Exactly.
That little detail.
And I think those things are important because you don't want, this should be a visceral, emotional thing for anybody paying attention to it, which is these guys tried to overthrow democracy.
Yeah.
But courts have a real responsibility, especially when they're establishing precedent on something novel. Somebody's taken a courageous step that you're talking about, and which attorneys generally don't like, mediocre attorneys don't like. The crazy and the brilliant will do it. And the court needs to accept both, okay, what do we got here? All right. Yes, nope. But not just throw it out and get out of my courtroom and, no, I'm banging all this. No, this is like these are nuanced things. And I think it sounds like your lawsuit's going to help establish a higher level of jurisprudence around something that needs some more security. So that's really commendable.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the interesting things about the court case is it originally wasn't going to happen until November of 2023, right? When New Hampshire filing season for presidential candidates opened. I would have to file, and then, of course, I'd be there day one waiting for the door to open. But then, of course, we'd have to wait for Trump to file. And then at that point, we're both candidates, and I can officially bring a lawsuit against him in state court. His attorneys would most likely move it to federal court. And then whatever the decision was, they would likely want to go ahead and skip the appellate court and go straight for, a writ of certiorari to the U.S. Supreme Court. I thought of a new novel theory. So again, kind of thinking out of the box as an attorney. And I decided to bring a suit against the Federal Election Commission. And so that's the case that is currently, well, I'll tell you right now, we had to withdraw the case. We're going to refile it in July because we had to supplant it with the FEC complaint, which now we did it correct. We forgot to get it notarized. That's my bad. But one little thing. But yeah, we got it resubmitted. It's been acknowledged. I've made it publicly available. But it effectively incorporates the entire lawsuit, all the legal analysis. But what we're effectively telling the FEC is that if you accept Donald Trump's FEC Form 2 statement of candidacy, you're effectively acknowledging the legitimacy of his candidacy, and that contravenes Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Now, it's a new theory. They would say, oh, hey, we're accepting this not as a determination of his eligibility, but just to, monitor his finances as a candidate. So it's a new legal theory. But that one, I honestly give it about 50-50 because they have a good argument that they're not the arbiters of eligibility. They're only to oversee the finances. But what it does is it's a shot across the bow of the Trump campaign, letting them know, we're here, we're coming after you.
It's stunning that we're having this conversation. I can't believe we're actually having this conversation about whether Trump is going to be able to run again. Never mind that you have to sue him to get him off the ballot. But there you go. That is where we are in America today. I want to go back to, I think it was in September of 2020 that Donald Trump first used the Insurrection Act. It was right after those BLM protests were taking place. And he was speaking to Judge Pirro, if she's really a judge, on Fox News. Let's take a listen to that clip, and then we'll come back and discuss whether that has any legal bearing on any of this.
They say that they're going to threaten riots if they lose on election night, assuming we get a winner on election night. What are you going to do?
We'll put them down very quickly if they do that. We have the right to do that. We have the power to do that if we want. Look, it's called insurrection. We just send in and we do it very easy. I mean, it's very easy. I'd rather not do that because there's no reason for it. But if we had to, we'd do that and put it down within minutes. Minneapolis, they were having problems. We sent in the National Guard within a half an hour. That was the end of the problem. It all went away. You look at Kenosha, look at the problems they had. In fact, the sheriffs there, the police chief, they're all on my side 100%. Law enforcement all over the country is on my side.
So, the first time I heard the Insurrection Act coming out of the Trump circles was a little before that, when Roger Stone was talking to Alex Jones, sort of towards the end of September. But then this clip came up of Pirro and Trump also talking about the Insurrection Act. Does that form some sort of premeditation? Does that sort of indicate that this was maybe where they started planning? I mean, he's not talking specifically about the insurrection that happened on January the 6th, but it's close.
I mean, what caught my attention the most was how he said they had the National Guard in there within 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. That to me was the most telling, because within 30 minutes, he was able to get the National Guard activated and they were boots on the ground. And yet that's not what we saw on January 6th. We saw, we saw intentional heel dragging. And I think it wasn't until it was being reported back to the White House that it wasn't really going anywhere and it wasn't going kind of as planned that they went ahead and said, oh shit, we need to call this off and let's go ahead and put the National Guard in now. But I think it's only on when they saw that their plan wasn't going as planned that they decided to start kind of backpedaling.
That's correct. It took 187 minutes for the first call, the first order to get. There were various orders to send the National Guard in. The first request came at 3:00 when Mayor Bowser called in and said she'd like the National Guard sent in. But it took until 4:35 until Mueller actually gave the order. And then it took another 36 minutes to 5:08 before he actually gave them the order to deploy. I don't know what the different standings of all these different orders are, but it certainly is an indication to me that there's a long period of time. It's a lot longer than you'd expect the Capitol to be defended by the National Guard in an event like of this scale when you know there's an emergency going on.
Exactly.
Hold on. There's another detail in there, which is the National Guard had the right to deploy without specific authorization if there was an immediate threat to life or property.
They changed that just the week before.
They changed it a few days before.
Right. It's just kind of telling. And in fact, they didn't just change that. They changed the entire instructions. We'll go through it in a bit of everything the National Guard could even be wearing that day in terms of protective gear or anything that looked threatening or you name it. They were on that. So again, does all those things matter? Does that look like premeditation?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they were laying the foundation for this coup. The best that you can expect Mark Meadows and Trump and all of them to lay it. But, and again, I think others in the judiciary and others in the legislative branches didn't start jumping in until it started looking like it might succeed. Then, of course, when it all fell apart, everybody started backpedaling and pretending that they had no knowledge and, they had no idea. And all of a sudden, everyone has amnesia and has no recollection. So, but
they're very good at their do not recall.
They were definitely planning it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Stuart Rhodes, who's the head of the insurrectionist Oath Keepers, really, also I think he's been indicted in the seditious conspiracy indictment, at least in one of them. He was on December the 12th. Is another time we heard him start talking about an insurrection publicly. And I want to play you this clip because I think it is very telling the way he is positioning this. This is December the 12th.
To go seize all the files, all the databases, and he needs to free Julian Assange and put him in charge of doing a data dump to display to all of you all the skeletons out of the closet into the streets.
Wait.
Show the world who the traitors are, and then use the Insurrection Act to drop the hammer on them.
Did he? Hold on. He wanted to free Assange too?
So Assange could help them identify who they needed to drop the hammer on, you know?
Man, he's busy in that Ecuadorian. He wasn't even in the Ecuadorian embassy. He's like he's in jail in the UK.
He was at that point under custody of not in custody. He was in. But he was in the Ecuadorian embassy in London and hiding.
No, not on the 21st. Like he'd been taken out of there, and I think he's just in a holding.
Oh, now he's just recently. I think they just finally agreed that he should be, moved here for courts for trial. So it's going to happen.
Hold on that because I'll get too excited. No, when I saw it, it was like, oh, it's down to Priti Patel, the Home Secretary. Now it's like now they've gotten through the gate to the other charge it'll be extradited unless the other judge. It's a whole. You can get
so we got
cool your jets on that, but. The guy's a front for Russian intelligence, it looks like. And so in addition to Insurrection Act, I was not expecting a free Assange moment.
No, I was not expecting Stuart Rhodes.
Didn't realize he'd be part of this. Does he have internet access? And like, what's he been up to? Has he got internet access in jail in the UK? Yeah. That's kind of messed up.
Yeah.
Just curious.
But apparently, Mr. Rhodes wants him released to help figure out who the traitors are. So that's another damning little bit of evidence. It doesn't directly lead us to Trump's inner circle or to Trump directly, but Stuart Rhodes is pretty high up there, and also, by the way, connected to the Rands. Meaning Paul Rand.
Rand Paul. I'm going
to go back to sleep, I think, tonight. I don't know what's going on with my brain. But, but he's associated with that whole Rand Paul dynasty, if you like, and worked for Ron Paul. So they might, in fact, lead up to one of to at least Rand Paul being another person who seems to have been potentially involved in supporting an insurrection.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, nothing to look at. All right. One final little tape before we move on of this one is the kingpin of them all. Well, the kingpin of them all was probably Donald Trump, but the other one was Michael Flynn. This is him on Newsmax, the right-wing TV station. And here he is on December the 17th talking about the Insurrection Act.
Also he could order within the swing states, if he wanted to, he could take military capabilities and he could place them in those states and basically rerun an election in each of those states. I mean, it's not unprecedented. I mean, these people out there talking about martial law, it's like it's something that we've never done. Martial law has been instituted 64 times, Greg. So I'm not calling for that. We have a constitutional process. We clearly have a constitutional process. I think you highlighted some of that in your previous segment. That has to be followed.
Yes. Wow.
I'm not calling for it, but
but he could. I'm not my idea, but he could.
This has happened. This is no big deal at all. It's like 64 times. Like, don't you? I mean, we just have the military break the act of posse comitatus and put shock troops in the street. Don't you? I mean,
it's nuts. Obviously. Yeah, okay, John. I mean, how crazy is that?
Oh no, it's absolutely insane. One of the things that I had specifically called for. One of the things they could do is a lot of things that he said publicly. If he was still active duty, he could be stripped of his military pension. Mm-hmm. That's how serious it is. Uniform Code of Military Justice is very, very harsh. Yeah. I mean, it would be as simple as Biden reactivating him and then just bringing charges under UCMJ and then stripping him of his pension. Actually, yeah,
because I'm super excited about this kind of stuff. Actually, there was speaking of appellate law, the appeals court of the armed forces. I forget if it was they affirmed the case, or I think they affirmed the case it was a serviceman who was accused of rape in Japan, and their decision, which became a presidential case law, is like if you have a substantial relationship with the U.S. government, so not like you did 4 years in the Army or 8 years in the Army, but a substantial amount, you still get a pension. You can be called back on criminal charges to be faced at UCMJ. And that was the middle of 2021 when that appellate decision came down. So that means big trouble for, Mike Flynn, for Stanley McChrystal, potentially. Doesn't Sean Spicer, was he a naval officer or something like that? Anyhow, and certainly anybody who was at the insurrection itself. And as you point out, Mr. Castro, actually, did you ever serve in the armed forces?
It was 6 months at the United States Military Academy Prep School. So
you just know that the UCMJ is not a tickle fight. That I've been told.
I mean, like, your average day American doesn't know things like that. When you are in military service, having an extramarital affair, it can land you in jail. They'll literally put you in military prison for that. And, I always find it hilarious when I tell my friends that are, civilian their whole life, they always seem shocked by that, and it's just kind of like, well, yeah, like, when you're wearing the United States Armed Forces uniform, you're held to a much, much higher standard, as you should be. You're representative of our nation and our republic.
And if you're a 3-star general who ran an intelligence agency, we get even more finicky about stuff. Like, not taking money from NSO Group, Israeli spyware, not taking money from the Turks, not taking money from UAE, not going on dinners with Vladimir Putin, and not trying to overthrow the government and murder Congress. I don't know. I could look it up. I mean, if you can't cheat on your wife in the UCMJ, I'm assuming trying to murder Congress, I'd have to look it up. 10 U.S. code something, but anyhow, so what I was told from an attorney who had military experience, if you really did it, you want to be in civilian court. If you didn't do it, you want to be at a court martial because it's just cut dry. Fact, law, application, prison, or front door. Well, so this is from military.com, and it is entitled Military Retirees Can Be Court-Martialed After All Appeals Court Decides. I take it back. It was earlier than that. It was January 29th, 2020. In the latest turn of a dramatic and winding court saga, a naval appeals court has released a split decision finding that a Navy retiree was properly court-martialed and convicted for a crime committed after he had left active duty. The en banc decision was published January 24th by the Navy Marine Corps Court of Criminal Appeals, with 4 judges agreeing with the final decision and 3 others dissenting. The matters concern retired Chief Petty Officer Stephen Begani, who pleaded guilty to attempted sexual assault and attempted sexual abuse of a child in December 2017 after corresponding and making plans with a naval criminal and an NCIS undercover agent pretending to be a 15-year-old girl. Begani had already transferred to inactive status in the Fleet Reserve following 24 years on active duty at the time of the crime, and appealed his conviction on the grounds that it was unconstitutional to court-martial active duty retirees like him when retired reservists were not subject to court-martial. In an August 9th, 2019 decision described as a bombshell, the NMCCA agreed with Begani, overturning his sentence of 18 months confining and a bad conduct charge. The victory, however, would be short-lived. In October, the appeals court withdrew its opinion, setting up conditions for reconsideration and an overturn, which came 4 months later. So, I forget the steps that it took, and maybe you can answer this question. Does the appeals court of the armed services, is there a Supreme Court of the armed services, or does that go to the regular Supreme Court to affirm that kind of a thing?
I believe that would go to the regular Supreme Court, which it has in the past. So, yeah, it would definitely go to the U.S. Supreme Court.
I'm just going to check if my mic. Can you guys hear me?
You're back.
Oh, no.
You're back.
There you go.
Okay,
the next question I had. What I was going to
continue doing about some of this other stuff that I was trying to lay out this timeline. So let me jump back in here. It's a good place to start. December 12th, Stuart Rhodes, speaking of the Jericho March, calls up Julian Assange that he wants to be released to come up and drop the hammer on all the traitors. We just heard that clip at the Jericho March. That's December the 12th. December the 17th, Michael Flynn appears on Newsmax. That's a quote we just listened to 34 times. He says the martial law has been imposed. Why not do it again? Although he's not really calling for it. The next day, Michael Flynn, Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood join a bunch of state Republicans in a heated meeting with Donald Trump in the White House, where they're actually going over the whole martial law plan. And it's at this meeting where we think he gave the green light to go ahead and do whatever it is they were trying to do. But it included the martial law plan, and it included the fake slate of electors. And then the next day after that, in a tweet on December the 19th, Trump goes, come to January the 6th, because it will be wild, to all his followers. So there's a chain of events, John, that really certainly talk about premeditation, but they also talk about conspiracy, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming. I mean, if this was any other scenario, there'd already be an indictment. There'd already be, they'd be gearing up for trial already. But, it's just It makes sense. I respect Merrick Garland. I know that he is meticulous. He doesn't want to throw a punch unless he knows it's going to land a knockout. And I get that. But at the same time, you can't get so paralyzed with wanting to be so precise that you never take the swing. You know what I mean? And so I think that's the part. There has to be a point where, you bring that charge against, a person that's perceived as politically untouchable, and just the weight and impact of, bringing formal charges against a former president would be enough to scare other people to start flipping. But I think they're trying to get others to flip around him first, but you can't. They're all going to assert executive privilege, and they all get their confidence and their willingness to, throw the finger to the DOJ from Trump. So if Trump says, hey, I got your back, don't worry about this, you don't abandon me, I don't abandon you, they're going to stand by him. And I think that's the part that Merrick Garland it's not calculating in his brain, right, is that they're not going to flip. You need to bring charges directly against Trump, and that'll get everybody around him to start flipping.
Well, can I bring another little detail point in here? Yeah. May have slipped under the radar, but Biden just put in his official, recommendation, or he's choosing a new ATF director, right, by the name of Steve Dettelbach, who has just, interestingly enough, just gotten an endorsement from all the prosecutors of the Oklahoma City bombing, which is interesting because who the attorney general is. Merrick Garland prosecuted Timothy McVeigh, and that case depended heavily on ATF evidence. And, ATF is the principal agency behind investigating domestic terrorism. And there's been a lot of groups, a lot of cells that have had to be infiltrated. And a lot of that happened after January 6th, where these people were emboldened. They had just committed some of these acts that would get them in that proved that they were certainly amenable to this, even if they hadn't brought guns or hadn't used them that day. A lot of them met up at the January 6th event in Washington, D.C., and then went off with a bunch of FBI agents undercover and other confidential human sources reporting directly to the FBI to start planning their next set of attacks. And I think it's one of the reasons that Merrick Garland has not thrown the full knockout punches. You're not just taking out Trump. I mean, and you could say you got the lower tier guys and you've got the mob boss. You could run this like a RICO prosecution, but this one's a little different because you've had the NRA and other groups who have been stoking this Second Amendment solutions. If we don't like what's going to go on, we're going to shoot our way out. And there's been a lot of cells that have been, the terrorist cells a la Al-Qaeda that have been established in the United States. And it's funny, the Republicans have been vehemently opposed to Biden putting in a director at the ATF. How about that? Yes, this whole time. And then just, I think yesterday, they appointed a new, I think it's the U.S. Attorney for Arizona. I'm sorry, I forgot the name off the top of my head. He's moving to acting director, and the Senate's going to hear this Mr. Dettelbach's nomination. So I think that means they're ready to let her rip, because in prosecutions, if you have an acting whatever, the prosecution can be going along, the investigation can be going along. Often they don't want to file the charges until they have a full U.S. attorney, a full director of an agency, and then full speed ahead. So I saw that as a sentinel event that we're ready to take on the domestic terror issue in this country.
It's certainly about time. I mean, we're heading into another election just around the corner. I wanted to take a look quickly at this other date, November 9th. There's a series of changes that happened within the Pentagon, within the Department of Defense, leading up to the insurrection, which some people say is also significant. There was, the leadership of the Department of Defense was sort of replaced with all these guys, people you've probably never heard of, or maybe you've heard of a couple of them, but, Kash Patel being one that you've probably heard of, but General Tata, Douglas McGregor, Michael Ellis, and Ezra Cohen Watnick, these are all people who are, fringe, I would say, in the traditional DoD universe, but also people with some sort of foreign alignment in most cases. And just heading into the end of his term, Donald Trump decides to get rid of all the existing leadership at the DoD and replace it with these people. Now, I know that is a significant event for you, Eric. You've been talking a lot about that. But then on top of that came this other event on November the 9th, when suddenly the Secretary of Defense was replaced from Esper to Miller, which at that point was a signal to a lot of people that something strange was about to happen. You don't do that right after the elections just because. You do it right after the elections because you're wanting to do something in the remaining month of your term. So, Eric, what are your thoughts on this? I know you've spoken a lot about this before, but when you look at this chain of events and this wholesale changeover at the Pentagon, what does that mean to you?
Well, it was probably clear that, Mr. Esper was like, nope. He caught wind of what he's heard some conversations like, thank you, I'll just go to regular jail over what's happened here. I'm not going to be buried under the prison with you lot, and remember, even William Barr didn't make it all the way through that. Like, nope. And they went after Jeffrey Rosen. He's like, at the DOJ, he's like, no, thank you. And they were like,
even the people they thought were going to say yes said no. So they were down to the second tier. Yeah.
I mean, it's funny when you read some of the descriptions of the conversations, like with Pat Cipollone, who is White House counsel and Pence's White House counsel. These are not people who would seem very heroic to the average liberal. You know what I mean? And you read the transcripts, and some of them are from emails, and some of this has come out of the Jan 6 committee already or into the news. I forget where I've read them, but they're like, this is insane. John Eastman is insane. It's like, and again, Mr. Castro here has given the due propers to a novel, great advancements in jurisprudence is made from novel arguments and the courage to have them. And some things are just fucking insane. And you have to go, no, we're all going to die under a prison if you do this. And so the guys at the White House are like, I came this far, but we're done here. And so I'd say offhand, Esper, either he's like, I no, you're not doing this. So, okay, fine. We're going to get somebody who we have on camera with goats or something. We're going to get him, and he will do this. That timeline, the December 17th, 18th, 19th. Hey, do you know when Charles Flynn got an extra star so he could move to a different office? December 20th.
December 20th.
Did you know that?
I remember that.
And he was confirmed by a voice vote in the Senate. Isn't that interesting timing, guys?
Yeah, they're so quick to confirm some people and others not so quick, which is so interesting.
Mike Flynn's brother needs an extra star right now so he can be in a certain place in that office.
It certainly appears that way. That's what it looks like to me. John, what do you think of all these different moves around the Pentagon in the weeks leading up to the 6th?
It reminds me a lot of everything that happened before November 22nd, 1963. Too many coincidences. It's too many. It's clear at this point that they're laying the foundation. They want to make sure that everything goes as planned. And thank God it didn't work, and thank God they were able to get members of Congress off the floor, because I think January 6th would have been an entirely different day. It could have been a weird hostage situation. Who knows what would have happened to Mike Pence if they drove him away in the limousine? Probably would have never heard from him again. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of things that could have gone south real fast. But
there is a difference between just having an insurrection or rebellion against the government and having one from within the Pentagon, within the Department of Defense. I mean, that's a whole different level of trying to take over the government.
Oh, yeah. I mean, right now, I can tell you that right now they're trying to make it seem like, this was just a bunch of half-wits, right? It's Trump, it's Meadows, it's a few people who thought they could try to pull this off on their own. And they're trying to make it seem like they did all this. It was totally on their own. The lone nut theory, except it's just a group of nuts. I don't buy that. There were people complicit in the federal judiciary up into and including, I think, the Supreme Court. And, time will tell as far as, the level of everyone's involvement and the punishments that they should face.
I mean, we've never had anything approaching a coup from the inside in the United States. I mean, this is quite an aggressive move. I mean, something that we've never even contemplated that something like this would happen. I mean, that's a very, thoroughly treasonous, you would think.
I've got a statute that comes from the Uniform Code of Military Justice. This is 10 U.S. Code Chapter 894, mutiny or sedition. Mm-hmm. Any person subject to this chapter who, one, with intent to usurp or override lawful military authority, refuses in concert with another person, blah, 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 with the intent to cause the overthrow or destruction of lawful civil authority, creates in concert with any other person revolt, violence, or other disturbance that is against authority, is guilty of sedition. And 3, fails to do his utmost to prevent and suppress a mutiny or sedition being committed in his presence, or fails to take all reasonable means to inform his superior commissioned officer or commanding officer of a mutiny or sedition which he knows or has reason to believe is taking place, is guilty of a failure to suppress or report a mutiny or sedition. B, a person who is found guilty of attempted mutiny, sedition, or failure to suppress or report a mutiny or sedition shall be punished by death.
Yeah.
It's very telling. So when you look at that timeline, then on the 3rd, let's just pull this up again. So on the 6th, sorry, at 3:00, Mayor Bowser is asking for additional resources. At 3:04, Miller gives the orders to begin planning the National Guard coming in. But then it's really only until 4:32 that he finally gives the order to deploy. I'll explain those 90 minutes in just a second. But between then, 3:19, Miller was told by Pelosi and Schumer that they needed the National Guard in, or at least was heard that request had come in. At 4:08, he'd heard from Pence directly saying he needed to clear the Capitol. Only at 4:17 did Trump release his go home video. And then at 4:30 is when the actual order to deploy was given, he says. And then it was still 36 minutes until the actual order was deployed. So there was a series of different orders, but I guess he didn't actually send them in until 5:08. All of this played out in Congress when Miller testified. And here's a clip of some of what went on that day.
I had a meeting with President Trump on the 3rd of January concerning some international threats. And at the very end, he asked if there were any requests for National Guard support, and I informed him of Mayor Bowser's request.
Mr. Miller, to clarify that point, did you tell the president about the mayor's request, or did President Trump ask if there were requests?
He asked if there were requests.
What was the president's response to you with regard to the request made by Mayor Bowser?
Fill it and do whatever was necessary to protect the demonstrators and that were executing their constitutionally protected rights.
Boy, that doesn't sound like the kind of order you'd want from the president of the United States in the middle of an insurrection. So he gets caught up in that a little bit. John, any thoughts on that?
It's at that point, you're trying to order the military to assist in the insurrection that's not going as you had hoped.
And he obviously didn't even follow those orders. Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Again, I think to a certain extent, some people were manipulated, but again, to suggest that nobody at DOD was, complicit in the planning and execution of this, I think is a ridiculous assertion. There was definitely there were some complicit actors in DOD for sure.
So to Eric's point earlier on, who does all this?
I was just going to say, the way that statute reads, which applies to anybody, who's actively in the service or was actively in the service and still has a substantial relationship, what the precedent case law says is that mutiny statute applies to you. And it's not just overthrowing the military order, but the civilian order. So not only are the people who were behind this, who served in uniform or had that substantial relationship, right? Not only are those people who are directly behind this possibly guilty of mutiny, which is punishable by death, but also the statute reads pretty clearly, if you saw something and you didn't say something and you didn't cover your ass with a memo and you didn't run this up the flagpole and you didn't tell someone to try and stop the unlawful overthrow of civilian authority, the Uniform Code of Military Justice isn't very forgiving, what with that will kill you penalty that they have. So there's some people that, man, I'm glad that's not what I was up to on January 6th, 2021. Damn.
Yeah.
Is anything going to be done on these guys? Basically, if all we get is the commission from, Congress, we're not going to get to see any other trials. Is anything going to get done here? Like, are these, people who are overthrowing the government inside the Pentagon and not going to get to face any justice, and neither are these plotters in the GOP?
I think we're going to be seeing this for the next 4 to 8, possibly even 10 years. I think it's going to take a lot of time for it to come out. Mm-hmm. They also want, emotions to settle on it. But I also know, that the government cares a lot about, public perception, mm-hmm. and so they want to try to maintain the narrative that this was just a few bad actors, Trump and his inner circle, and let's try to hold them accountable. But I think they're really afraid of bringing charges against some of the head people because, it starts connecting dots and showing that, there are other people that are complicit in this. So I think there's enough people implicated that as sad as it is, I don't think they're going to be held accountable. criminally.
If you play your cards right, there'll be so many people implicated by the time we get to the elections. You might actually land up being the nominee.
That's been thrown around as the dark horse. And I think that's why they're already grooming DeSantis, to basically be, Trump's heir apparent.
Yeah.
They're starting to coalesce around him because I think they know that, people like me and others are very, very determined to not see Trump return to office. And, people have said, hey, DeSantis is basically Trump 2.0, except, with a brain, he could have actually probably pulled off the coup. And I'm not too concerned with his policies and with his politics. He showed a little bit of heavy-handedness with the way that he approached some of the data scientists with regard to COVID and, raiding that woman's home and all. But, we've yet to see whether he would do something like this insane, as far as trying to overthrow, a democratic election. But my main goal is making sure.
I spent an hour challenging you on that, but I'm not going to right now because we're running out of time. But
my main goal is stopping Trump. If during the course of that process people love my policies and they would love to see me run again, either for president again or for a Senate position or whatever it may be, I'd be open to that in the future. But for now, my candidacy has one very clearly stated goal, and that's to ensure that Trump does not ever step foot into the White House again.
That's a goal we can all agree on, I think. Is there any way that they can support you still? I mean, what should people do to get support your campaign?
Well, I'm running an entirely self-financed campaign, so I have had a lot of people reach out, wanting to contribute. And I've said, no, please support, the midterm elections. That's where the money's needed right now. I'm doing well. My company's growing. I can self-finance this. And I'm probably going to put in about, 25 to 50 million of my own money. Wow. And New Hampshire is going to be a very serious campaign. I'm actually buying real estate out there next summer. It's going to serve as, vacation home / campaign headquarters. And I'm going to pump a lot of money into New Hampshire. I want to see how I can actually perform. But I do know right now it is the party of Trump. It is going to be difficult. But this can set, my national brand. And, kind of like Nixon, he ran a very unsuccessful campaign. When was it? In 1960? And then, came back in 68 to win. So, I'll do this to get my name out there, let people know who I am. I'm a principled, compassionate conservative.
We hope that's where the comparisons end.
Nixon's my role model.
Yeah, that is where the comparisons end. Yeah, it took me a while to wait, what? And, but
yeah. And I'm from a native Vermonter. Whatever you want to do in New Hampshire, you can't go wrong. And if you want to, get place in Lake Winnipesaukee, that's a great idea. You're gonna love it. So you can't. None of this. All this is on the up and up. And if you can create some case law here, I'm not concerned about Trump not running again. I'm concerned that I think we got this principle of the last time we came to this kind of a point of civil war. Where we actually did it and had one, that we had to go, wait. If you were on the other team last time, you can't be in charge of anything this time. And that's pretty reasonable. And luckily, because we're not ex-Yugoslavia and we're not Somalia, there hasn't been a great, there's not a lot of robust case law. But here we had an insurrection, and there's only been 3 or 4, depending on how you want to count them, and establishing some principles around that. And not just, a discussion, but, when you this is the thing, these courts can be very frustrating, but when you put down, there was a case, we made these arguments, this lower court decided this, and this higher court made this decision, then you can have a more robust national discussion that informs the legislature, the legislative branch that can, maybe rewrite some statutes, and those will then be dealt with by the executive branch. It's almost like we have a pretty good system of government here. So, which is why I really oppose murdering Congress and installing a dictator.
Going to end it there. John, tell us a little bit about where people can find you online.
Yeah, so it's johncastro.com, and then from there you'll be able to find all my social media handles. I'm very active on Twitter. Previously wasn't, but now I've learned to really love it a lot. It's a quick way to get your word out, and especially policy positions.
Yeah, but it's the battlefield. It sure is the battlefield these days. And Eric Garland, the podcast is Game Theory Today, but also you can find him on Twitter at Eric Garland. We have lots to discuss in the future episodes tomorrow night, because today is Thursday. We'll be back with the after show. So we'll see you guys all then. Thank you, John, and thank you, Eric. Have a good night.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Narrative is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative.